Okay, so I'm talking about books 4 and 5 of the Confessions of St. Augustine. This isn't going to be really a comprehensive overview of everything that happens in these books. There were a couple of bits that stood out to me, and those are what I'm going to talk about, if that's all right. So one of the major things that happens in book 4 is that Augustine describes a very dear friend to him who actually ends up dying. And the first thing that I find really striking about this part of the narrative is just the description that Augustine gives of how deeply he's affected by his friend's death. And how it really it cuts him to his heart, really. I'm going to read you a few bits out of this, if that's okay. For the record, I've got F.J. Sheed's translation of the Confessions, which is not the most modern translation, but it is really beautiful. So, upon Augustine's friend's dying, he says, "My heart was black with grief. Whatever I had looked upon had the air of death. My native place was a prison house, and my home a strange unhappiness. The things we had done together became sheer torment without him. My eyes were restless looking for him, but he was not there. I hated all places because he was not in them. They could not say he will soon come as they would in his life when he was absent. I became a great enigma to myself, and I was forever asking my soul why it was sad and why it disquieted me so sorely. And my soul knew not what to answer me." I think it's just, as they say, such a beautiful expression of the grief that is, that I think anybody can relate to at the loss of a loved one, but is quite rare for us to hear expressed these days, especially by men in the last few decades, at any rate. But Augustine, he's moved to ponder several things after the death. So in the run-up to the death of his friend, Augustine and his friend, both not Christian, both sort of loving life and just taking things as they come, enjoying each other's company. But when his friend falls very ill, he is baptized by those around him. And Augustine thought so he really dismisses this, and he's very scornful of it. And at one point his friend sort of comes around a little bit, and Augustine says, "Oh my gosh, they baptized you, isn't it stupid?" Like, oh. But his friend is actually very serious about it and says, "Oh no, don't talk about the sacraments like that. If you continue to talk about that, I'm not going to be able to be your friend." And Augustine's really shocked by this, and he does stop. It doesn't make him believe, but it clearly strikes him, and it stays with him even after the death of his friend. It doesn't cause him to have a conversion, but it's clearly something that he mulls over and comes back to it again and again in his thoughts. And when I was thinking about that, it just struck me that, the people that we love, that we let into our lives, really do have the power to influence us in a deep way. So we need to be careful, one, who we let ourselves be close to, but also to be mindful that God works in all things, and especially through our relationships, and he will be doing his best to turn them to our good. Augustine also goes on, because he talks a lot about how upset he is after his friend's death, which is fair enough. But he goes on to just sort of meditate on friendship itself. And one of the things that he says, which I really love, with the perspective of later on one who believes, is that when our friendships are rooted in God, we obviously, yes, we will still be upset when we lose them when they die, but we do not have the same, our grief is not the same, because we still trust and we have hope that we are bonded with our friends through God, and we will see our friends again, please God, in the next life. There's another passage here which I just really love, so I'm going to read to you. Blessed is the man that loves thee, O God, and his friend in thee, and his enemy for thee. For he alone loses no one that is dear to him, if all are dear in God, who is never lost. And who is that God but our God, the God who made heaven and earth, who fills them because it is by filling them with himself that he has made them? No man loses thee unless he goes from thee. And in going from thee, where does he go, or where does he flee, save from thee to thee? From God well pleased to God angered. Thy law is truth, and truth is thou. Sorry. But basically, because we cannot escape from God. So when we believe in God and we love him and we trust it, we put all our trust in him, we have all things in God. I suppose I was thinking about that too, just in terms of at the moment in the as a novice in the convent, I have limited contact with my friends. I can receive letters from them, but I won't be able to write back to any of them until I make first profession, please God. And it was just one of the things I have thought about sort of before reading this, but which brought me back to thinking about it, was that I miss my friends and I wish I could see them, and I often wish I could say certain things to them, but my friendships that are grounded in God, I still have a closeness with them, despite the fact that I can't see them and talk to them all of the time right now. And that's something that's really precious, and that gives me a lot of consolation. Now, I've talked about friendship for a while, so I'm going to move back on to book 5, in which Augustine goes to Rome, and book 5 describes a lot of his search for the truth, really. So Augustine is not a believer, but he is interested in finding the truth, and obviously he spends a lot of time believing in Manichaeism. He's a dualist. He speaks to a lot of teachers who have a lot of good arguments and who seem very convincing to him. But one of the interesting things is Augustine says himself that he only really listens to people who speak very well. He himself is a teacher of rhetoric, so he likes people to make very well-formed phrases, and he will judge them on how well they can put a sentence together. But he himself realizes that the arguments of the Manichees, there are a few bits missing, or that he hasn't had proper explanations from. And when he raises this to various Manichees, they say, oh, well, there's a man, Faustus, he's brilliant, he's going to be able to explain everything. So Augustine is like eagerly awaiting the arrival of Faustus so that he can put all these questions to him and be satisfied. But it says, when it actually happens, he says, so he meets Faustus and he says, I sought his attention at a time when we could properly exchange ideas. I mentioned certain questions that concerned me, and I found at once that the man was not learned in any of the liberal sciences save literature, and not especially learned even in that. And he goes on to say he's not convinced by his arguments. Faustus is a great speaker. He speaks very well, very fluently, but even he doesn't have the answers that Augustine is searching for. So at this point, Augustine he's still a Manichae, but he hasn't yet found the answer to the restless longing that he has. Right towards the end of book 5, Augustine makes friends with a bishop, a Catholic bishop, Ambrose. Now it says that Ambrose he's a very good man, and this is what Augustine says about him. I came to love him, not at first as a teacher of the truth, which I had utterly despaired of finding in your church, but for his kindness towards me. I attended carefully when he preached to the people, not with the right intention, but only to judge whether his eloquence was equal to his fame, or whether it flowed higher or lower than had been told me. His words I listened to with greatest care. His matter I held quite unworthy of attention. I enjoyed the charm of his speaking, though for all his learning it was not so pleasing and captivating as that of Faustus. I refer, of course, only to the actual speaking. For the rest there was no comparison at all. Faustus was simply straying about the fallacies of the Manichees. Ambrose taught the doctrine of salvation most profitably. but salvation is far from sinners of the sort that I then was. Yet little by little I was drawing closer, though I did not yet realise it. So Ambrose is a less persuasive speaker than Faustus, but his arguments have more weight, I suppose. They're more well-founded, and Augustine can recognise that. But I just find it interesting that Augustine, he dwells more on the friendship of Ambrose than on his teaching. It says he comes to love him not as first as a teacher, but for his kindness. And I think, it just speaks to, if we're hoping to preach, it's going to be through our actions that we will be most convincing, or that we will first preach to people. People will first notice our manner, how we treat the people around us, the people who we're close to and the people who we've just met, the people who are serving us and the people who we are serving. And it again reminded me to sort of link back to what I said about his friendship before. The people who we love and who we're close to really influence us. And although Augustine is not initially, convinced by Ambrose's arguments, his sound arguments for the truths of the church, he stays with him, and it says he was becoming, little by little, he was drawing closer to the truth because of Ambrose's love and his example of kindness. The last thing that I just wanted to briefly mention was that I was thinking about was right at the end of Book 5, it says that Augustine's not yet convinced by the arguments of the church, but he is realizing more and more the problems with the arguments of the Manichees. So it says here, the Catholic side was clearly not vanquished, yet it was not clearly victorious. And then a little bit later on, I decided that I must leave the Manichees, for in that time of doubt I did not think I could remain in a sect to which I now preferred certain of the philosophers. So he's realised that he needs to leave the Manichees, but he's not yet ready to leave the church. And that's maybe not what I was expecting to happen in this narrative. I knew that Augustine was a convert, but I think I sort of thought that he would, see the truths of the church and then immediately sort of switch over. And I was realising that often in our lives, there is, certain fallacies or even certain sins that we hold on to, even we're conscious of, and we would like to make a leap to the truth or to the right way of behaving. But it's not always as simple as just switching one opinion for another or one behaviour for another. First, the bad behaviour or the bad train of thought has to be removed so that there is room for the truth and the goodness to take its place. So Augustine's not ready to become a Christian yet, but because he's realised, well, actually, I don't really believe in Manichaeism anymore, that is in itself making space in his life to welcome the truth again, little by little. So yes, she'll tune in to next week's episode to see what happens next, but that's all I have to say for the moment. Thank you.